Hey guys, this is Logan here with Hydra572, and this is my Quartermaster QTR4 Hannibal in Texas T. This is a really cool looking knife. Some of you probably remember that early on when I got this blade I had some lockup problems, and I sent it into Quartermaster and they took really good care of me with their warranty department. Now, as I thought about what I wanted to put in my review for this knife, I realized that I just didn't have any information as far as its use as a utility cutter or as a defensive blade. I had been made uncomfortable by the way that the lock was failing the first time around, and so I had just really babied this large knife, and I didn't have any information. So I want to do a testing video now and show you guys some light use up through some moderate use of this here blade. I will start by showing you guys this is not the stock edge, but it is still decently sharp. Slicing through that magazine paper, a little bit toothy. I think this is about as sharp as it came from the factory, and I did not alter the edge geometry significantly. So I'll start with, here I have a post office box. This cutting test is just meant to show a really reasonable task for this blade, just cutting through some cardboard to get into a package, and I'll do it over and over again to simulate repetition over multiple days opening packages up. So we'll go ahead and get started. There is definitely a pronounced difference cutting with this part of the blade with a different grind than up here near the tip. You can definitely feel that transition. See if we can do some tip cutting. I mean, obviously you have more material there, so it is a little bit more difficult to cut. But overall, for such a thick blade stock, that is cutting pretty dang well. This is pretty thin, easy cardboard to cut. I'm also surprised with how angular this handle is, that this really choked up grip using it as a utility cutter is pretty dang comfortable. No problems with lockup wobble on this one. I sent it in, got a brand new one. Lockup is pretty solid. Flips open like a dream. I will continue cutting. Like I said, encountering some difficulty up there near the compound grind transition. That is just some thick cardboard down there at the bottom. There I felt the liner move just a little bit as I drug my fingers across it, and that is part of what I'm worried about with the liners being so exposed, is that as you twist your hand you might disengage the liner. Obviously more of a defensive use concern than an EDC cutting concern. And now that we've done what I would call a moderate through light amount of cardboard cutting, we will retest on some magazine paper, see how the edge has held up. You guys can see we're still cutting, but it's definitely, there we go. It's definitely a bit toothier, and that's weird this early on in testing to see this much wear, especially on a nice steel, but with a wide-stocked blade, edge geometry is really important, and this baby came with quite a bit of material behind the edge, so maybe this much wear is to be expected. And here we have some thin burlap rope. This stuff is chronically unkind to edges, but I'd say it still falls within the realm of completely reasonable for most folders. I will try to cut it in a variety of ways, see how this blade holds up. First, try to kind of saw through it with our tip here. That was a little bit more difficult than I would expect it to be, and I do actually feel some front to back lock slip type play starting to creep in. I don't like that at all. So we continue to saw. Yeah, it's becoming more pronounced. Unfortunately, I don't think the lock faces of this knife were machined particularly well. Quartermaster is a very young company, and I think that sort of thing comes with experience. Unfortunately, it does sort of disqualify the knife for hard use if it's not just my fingers rubbing against the liners, which it very well could be. Test it for play. There's a little bit more than when we started. I realize I'm a freak about that, but that. So encountering a little bit more resistance from the rope than I would expect or want to, but with a thick blade stock that is going to happen. It's the problem. Thick blade stocks are a lot of fun. They make the knife heavy, they make it feel good, but if it doesn't cut, what's it really worth? So that was obviously a saw through rather than a cut. That is a little bit disappointing. Like I said, lots of material right behind the edge. Not perfect edge geometry in a wide stock, but I would expect better cutting performance than that. It shouldn't be that difficult to saw through that material. By way of comparison, just so you guys can see that I don't have adamantium rope here in front of me, here's the Kershaw Echelon, another blade that I am planning on reviewing soon. And just to prove that I think this is really reasonable use for an EDC folder, there was that, there was our chop, no saw through, and see if we can do 2 strands. No saw, but you know, much better edge geometry, slimmer stock, that is the way it is. Back to the blade at hand. Let's do another test on our magazine paper, see how our edge is holding up. Alright folks, that just plain doesn't make sense. I think we might be seeing a wire edge at play, because the angle of the cut is playing in a whole lot to how it cuts. As you guys see, if I try to steepen up the angle just a little bit, it refuses to bite. I hadn't thought that this blade had a wire edge on it prior to starting the testing, but it very well might. Now, I'm a little bit tentative to do this portion of the test because this is verging into what I would say is moderate use for a blade like this. And we have seen a little bit of blade play encroaching so far, but I want to try it anyway, so I'm just going to go with a relatively low percentage of how hard I think I can hit this stack of cards. I'm not going to be trying to abuse this thing. I'm just going to give it a few good whacks and see how it holds up. For reference, blade play side to side, still pretty minimal. Up and down, I am feeling a little bit. Might go away when I tighten up the pivot after testing, I am not sure. Without further ado, here we go. I'm going to start off really light, maybe give it 25-30%. As you guys saw, not a whole lot of penetration there. Not a lot of blade play either, though I am definitely starting to feel lock slip encroaching, and that is a bummer. I'll give it one more and we can call it good. Card's over, and this time I'll give it closer to 50. A little bit more penetration. I definitely felt the lock start to slip on that one. And there is noticeable front to back blade play now, which is pretty depressing. That's a bummer overall. I wanted to see this blade hold up a lot better. The guys over at Quartermaster are really cool. They took care of me with their warranty service. And like I said before, I'm a blade play snob. Most people would say that there's no blade play here, but I can feel some and it wasn't there before. And that is a pretty big bummer because, as you guys saw, that is just not abuse in my mind. Not for a blade this large. I was unsettled by the locking mechanism on the first one. Unfortunately, I just don't think they're machining their lock faces very well. So I just went and tightened up the pivot point. As you guys see, it is still deploying just fine, and now blade play has been reduced significantly, I would say. Side to side is pretty minimal. Up and down, there is still some with lock slip, and that is pretty depressing overall. I would call this a mixed test result. As you guys saw, it did pretty dang okay during the cardboard testing. It struggled a little bit on the rope. I think that's going to be a matter of edge geometry. Both times when I got this blade from the factory, it was a little bit toothy with quite a bit of material behind the edge, but this is 154 cm, so if you have the capability to sharpen it and change the edge geometry to your liking, I think it will cut pretty dang well. You're going to have some funk, what with the compound grind and with this weird flute on top, but I think you could turn this thing into a pretty good EDC utility cutter if you wanted something that was large and overbuilt and kind of steampunk and stylish. I think you'd do pretty well with this blade for a letter opener. I still don't think I can recommend this thing for hard use or defensive. Obviously, having this thing in your hand is better than having no implement to fight with, but I wouldn't buy this blade thinking that you're going to use it to defend yourself the same way that you might with a Cold Steel Voyager. The ergonomics overall were much better than I thought. The knife doesn't look particularly comfortable with all the angles in the handle, but especially choked up like this, I found that the knife was pretty dang comfortable and it worked for a lot of utility cutting tasks. Even with my stabbing, I found that there was a nice place to rest my thumb and that there was a good recess that I could get my palm into, so it felt pretty good even if it didn't function very well in those tasks. Overall, I think the guys at Quartermaster are really cool. They're knife nuts and they care about the community a lot. Unfortunately, I just can't give this blade a pass as far as defensive use goes. Still really cool guys. I'm by no means saying that I won't buy from Quartermaster anymore. I am very interested to see how the Boss Hog turns out, and I think I'll be picking up one of those. This blade unfortunately didn't meet all of my expectations, so I think with a reprofile and with reasonable expectations of use of this thing as just a utility cutter that you get to use to impress your friends, show off around, all that sort of stuff, I think people will still very much like this blade. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you are excited to see the review of this blade coming in the near future. Stay tuned for more of the same.